The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburban neighborhood when Michael Carter, a 42-year-old software engineer from San Diego, unlocked his garage door. A man known for his obsession with cars, Michael had spent years test driving nearly every new electric vehicle that hit the American market. From the sleek Teslas to the bold experiments of startups trying to disrupt the industry, he had seen it all. Or at least, he thought he had. On this morning, parked in his driveway, sat something different.
Something foreign.
Something whispered about on blogs and online forums, but rarely ever seen outside of Africa. It was an electric vehicle unlike any he had ever encountered. A car that supposedly needed no charging station. A car that, according to its creators, could power itself indefinitely.
Michael circlait the vehicle slowly, like an art collector studying a mysterious new masterpiece.
Its design was clean but futuristic, almost unassuming at first glance, until you noticed the subtle details. The body had a quiet strength, with edges that reflected the sunlight in a way that made the car almost seem alive. This wasn't one of the glossy models from Silicon Valley or Germany. It was an African innovation, born in the workshops of Harare, nurtured in the heart of a continent often overlooked when it came to technological breakthroughs. The story of this car had already reached international headlines. An inventor from Africa had built a self-charging EV, defying what engineers in the West insisted was impossible. But while many dismissed it as hype or exaggerated storytelling, Michael was one of the few who refused to judge without seeing it firsthand. When the opportunity came to test drive the vehicle, he didn't hesitate. He placed his hand on the hood, feeling the smooth surface. It wasn't cold, like most cars that had sat through the night. It was warm, as if there was something alive inside, pulsing gently with hidden energy. He smiled nervously. "Well," he muttered to himself, "let's see if you're really as special as they say." The first twist of the ignition sent a ripple through him. There was no roar of an engine, no humming of a battery engaging. Instead, the car came alive in complete silence, as though it had always been awake and was only now choosing to reveal itself. Michael adjusted his seat and glanced at the dashboard. Everything glowed with an unusual clarity: numbers, symbols, indicators. But there was no sign of a battery percentage.
Just an infinity symbol, glowing softly in green.
He frowned. "That can't be real," he whispered. But deep down, he wanted it to be. Pulling out of his driveway, Michael eased the vehicle onto the road. The steering was smooth, the acceleration almost eerily flawless. There was no lag, no hesitation, none of the slight mechanical shudders he'd grown used to even in the best EVs. Within seconds, the car glided effortlessly down the street, as if it was weightless. Neighbors watched curiously as he passed, some lifting their coffee mugs in lazy greetings, others narrowing their eyes at the unfamiliar car. Michael barely noticed. His mind was already racing with questions. Was this real? Was this sustainable? Could a car really generate enough energy to power itself endlessly, without ever needing to be plugged in? To find out, he decided to push the vehicle beyond its comfort zone. The freeway stretched wide before him, sunlight spilling across the asphalt. Michael pressed harder on the accelerator, and the car responded instantly, surging forward with a power that shocked him. 0 to 60 felt almost instantaneous, yet there was no vibration, no noise, just the steady whisper of air rushing past. He laughed, a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. This is insane. Cars on either side slowed slightly, their drivers glancing over with curiosity as the strange vehicle overtook them. Some recognized it from the news, others simply stared at its unusual design. One driver even rolled down his window and shouted, "Hey, what is that thing?" Michael only grinned, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Minutes turned into an hour, and still the car showed no signs of strain.
No heat warning, no energy drop, no need for a pit stop.
The infinity symbol on the dashboard remained steady, glowing like a quiet promise. At a rest stop, Michael finally pulled over. He stepped out, stretching his legs, but his eyes kept drifting back to the car. He expected to feel the usual warmth of a battery working hard, the faint smell of overworked machinery. But there was nothing.
Juste calme, power.
A man in a baseball cap approached him, curiosity written all over his face. "Excuse me," he said, pointing. "What kind of car is that?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then replied carefully. "It's African. A self-charging electric vehicle." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Self-charging? You mean it doesn't need gas or a plug? That's the idea, Michael said. He could hear the skepticism in the stranger's laugh, but it didn't matter. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't about what people believed, it was about what they were witnessing. Back on the road, Michael pushed the car harder. Long stretches of highway melted under its wheels. Hills, curves, sudden stops, nothing fazed it. And all the while, the infinity symbol shone, unbroken, unchanging. But as incredible as the performance was, it wasn't until he reached the city limits that the true shock arrived. Traffic was thick, the kind of endless sea of cars that drained energy quickly from even the best EVs. Stop-and-go driving, constant braking, the dreaded slow crawl through congested streets. Normally, this was where range anxiety hit hardest. But for Michael, it was different. As he tapped the brakes and rolled forward inch by inch, he noticed something extraordinary. The car wasn't losing energy, it seemed to be gaining it. Every pause, every deceleration, every stoplight only made the infinity symbol glow brighter, steadier. He leaned forward, stunned. This thing doesn't just sustain itself, he whispered. It thrives. His heart pounded as the realization sank in. If this technology was real, and everything in his bones told him it was, then it wasn't just a step forward. It was a revolution. A revolution born not in Silicon Valley, not in Tokyo, not in Berlin, but in Africa. And as Michael drove deeper into the city, people began to notice. Heads turned, phones were raised, whispers spread. A car that never needed fuel, never needed charging, weaving through the streets of America. For some, it was curiosity. For others, disbelief. But for everyone who saw it, there was one undeniable truth. Something world-changing had just arrived on their doorstep. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his eyes wide with wonder and determination. This was no ordinary test drive. This was history. And he was right in the middle of it. What happened next would shock not just him, not just his city, but the entire world. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The traffic ahead crawled forward, horns honking in frustration, but inside his car there was only silence, steady, calming silence. Yet his heart raced. He had tested cars all his life, but nothing had ever left him this unsettled. He reached for his phone, instinctively wanting to record, but then stopped. Would anyone even believe what he was seeing? An infinity symbol on the dashboard wasn't proof. People would call it a glitch, a hoax, a digital trick. They'd say he had faked the footage. No, Michael thought, he needed more than just video. He needed undeniable evidence. As the traffic cleared and he accelerated again, a plan began forming in his mind. He would drive the car until it failed.
No stop, no plug, no excuse.
If this really was what the inventors claimed, then it wouldn't fail. It couldn't. Hours passed. City blocks blurred into highways, highways into countryside. The world rolled by in an endless stream of asphalt and fields. Michael barely noticed the miles piling up. Normally, he would have calculated battery percentage, factored in charging stations, and worried about the next stop. But here, there was no worry. Just the infinity symbol, glowing steadily. At a small diner off Route 66, he pulled in for a break. As he stepped inside, the usual chatter died down. People turned to look, not at him, but at the car parked outside, framed perfectly in the dusty glass windows. "Hey," a waitress called out as she poured coffee for a trucker. "That your ride?" Michael nodded cautiously. "It doesn't even have a charging port, does it?" the trucker asked, his voice laced with disbelief.
Michael hésitait.
He wanted to protect the secret, but he also wanted to share it. He finally said, "It doesn't need one."
À Lockbrock out from the bus in the corner. À Manine à l'aider Jacqueline forward. D'était impossible.
"I've worked with batteries for 20 years. Everything runs out eventually." Michael simply smiled. Not this. The room went silent again. People stared, unsure whether to laugh at him or take his words seriously. But one thing was certain, every eye was drawn back to the car, as if it held some magnetic power. When Michael left the diner and slid back into the driver's seat, he realized something. This car wasn't just technology. It was disruption. It challenged not only engineering but also belief itself. People didn't just see a vehicle, they saw a contradiction to everything they thought they knew. He pulled back onto the road, determination sharpening inside him. If he was going to prove this car's worth, he needed to test it under extreme conditions. Smooth highways weren't enough. He needed mountains. He needed deserts. He needed challenges that would crush ordinary EVs. The following day before dawn, he set off toward the Mojave Desert. The dry, relentless heat made it a nightmare for vehicles, draining batteries faster than normal. If the car survived here, there could be no more doubts. The desert stretched endlessly, golden sand and jagged rock formations rising like ancient guardians.
Michael pressed the accelerator.
The car surged forward, its tires gripping the rough terrain with ease. Hours passed under the blazing sun, but still there were no signs of struggle.
The infinity symbol on the dashboard never wavered.
Michael shook his head in disbelief. You should be dying out here. But you're not. You're thriving. He drove deeper, past abandoned gas stations and forgotten towns, until he reached a point where no charging station existed for miles. In any other EV, this would have been madness. But not today. Not in this car. Finally, after more than 12 hours without stopping, exhaustion forced him to pull over. He stepped out, his shoes crunching against the desert gravel, and gazed at the car. The body shimmered faintly under the heat waves, but there was no sign of stress. No hum of overworked circuits.
No warning lights.
It was as if the car wasn't just surviving the desert, it was part of it. That night, Michael camped under the stars. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought about the implications. What if every car could run like this? No more charging stations.
No more gas.
No more dependence on fossil fuels. But with that dream came darker thoughts. What would happen to industries built on oil, on batteries, on charging networks? Would they allow such a car to exist? Would they fight to bury it? The desert wind whispered around him as he lay awake, and for the first time, Michael felt the weight of what he was uncovering. This wasn't just a test drive anymore. It was a revelation. And revelations were dangerous. The next morning, he continued his journey, heading toward the mountains. The steep climbs, the winding roads, this was where most EVs struggled, burning through their reserves to fight gravity. But as the car ascended, Michael noticed something extraordinary. Instead of draining power, it seemed to recover it. Every descent down the slopes gave it renewed strength. Every curve, every break seemed to feed it rather than weaken it. Michael laughed out loud, the sound echoing through the mountain air.
You're rewriting the rule.
By the time he reached the peak, he wasn't alone. Word had spread faster than he expected. Along the roadsides, people gathered with cameras, waiting to catch a glimpse of the legendary African EV. They cheered as he passed, their voices rising like a chorus. Reporters appeared.
Drone overhead above, capturing footage.
News vans lined the roads. Michael hadn't told anyone where he was going, yet somehow, the world had found him. The car had become more than just a test, it had become a spectacle. As he parked at a lookout point, the crowd surged forward, shouting questions.
How far have you driven?
Does it really never need charging? Is this a hoax? Michael raised his hands, trying to calm them. I've been driving for nearly 2 days straight. No gas. No charging. And it's still running. This is real. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to broadcast live. Within minutes, Michael's words spread across the globe. Headlines exploded. U.S. driver tests African self-charging EV, still running after 48 hours. Impossible technology or world's biggest hoax. Silicon Valley stunned by African invention. Michael looked out at the horizon, the car gleaming beside him. He knew there was no going back now.
The secret was out.
But what he didn't know, what he couldn't yet imagine, was how powerful forces around the world would soon turn their eyes toward him. Some with awe, some with fear, and some with the determination to stop him at any cost.